A record number of Americans are leaving the United States, once known as the land of immigration. America is now witnessing a wave of emigration. It's a shift not seen since the Great Depression. For the first time in decades, more Americans are moving out than moving in. A striking demographic shift is unfolding, one not witnessed in 250 years. In 2025, the United States recorded net negative migration, estimated by the Brookings Institute.
The last time more people left the United States than moved into it, Americans were fleeing to the Soviet Union, not escaping it, moving to it, on purpose. It was 1935. The Great Depression had gutted the country, and more than 100,000 Americans sent applications to Joseph Stalin's communist government, begging to work in his tractor plants and steel mills. They played baseball in Moscow's Gorky Park. Some were later imprisoned in gulags. The Soviets eventually had to start requiring Americans to show proof of return travel because so many kept showing up and refusing to leave. That was the last time the United States recorded negative net migration. Now it's happened again. In 2025, more people left the United States than moved into it for the first time in 90 years. The country that has defined itself as the destination, the beacon, the place every rational person on Earth is supposedly trying to reach, is now, by the numbers, a country people are leaving. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's just deportations. Trump cracked down on immigration, so of course fewer people are arriving. And you'd be partly right. The Department of Homeland Security logged 675,000 deportations and 2.2 million self-deportations in 2025. That is a real and enormous number.
Welcome back. Fresh new data shows 1 in 5 Americans would like to leave the country permanently. That's according to a new Gallup survey. And younger women are behind that spike. 2 in 5 women, in fact, from the ages of 15 to 44 now say they want to leave the U.S. for good. That's 4 times as many from 2014, when just 1 in 10 wanted to live abroad. Benedict Vice.
But hidden underneath that story is a different one the administration isn't talking about. One that raises much deeper and more uncomfortable questions about the country itself. American citizens, born here, raised here, holders of American passports, are leaving in record numbers. And they're not coming back. This isn't the Donald Dash. This isn't a political protest. This is a structural shift that has been building for a decade and accelerated in ways that should make every serious person stop and think about what it actually means when the people who built a country start choosing to live somewhere else. The numbers nobody wants you to see. Let's start with the data, because the data is genuinely shocking, and then it gets more shocking when you look at which data doesn't exist. Since the Eisenhower administration, the 1950s, the United States has not collected comprehensive statistics on the number of its own citizens leaving the country. The government tracks every visa application, every border crossing, every asylum claim. It has no reliable system for counting when its own people leave for good. The world's most data-saturated nation is flying blind on one of the most consequential demographic trends of the century. What we do have is a patchwork. The Wall Street Journal stitched together residence permits, foreign home purchases, student enrollment data, and other metrics from more than 50 countries. The Brookings Institution ran the numbers on net migration. Goldman Sachs economists weighed in, and what they found collectively is this: 150,000. Estimated net population loss in 2025, the people who left minus the people who arrived. Brookings notes the real number could be larger because official U.S. data doesn't fully capture departures. Minus 80%. Decline in net migration relative to the historical average, according to Goldman Sachs economists tracking the effects of 2025 immigration policy. Now here's what makes these numbers even more significant. They landed on top of an already dramatic collapse in people moving to America. Net international migration peaked at 2.7 million new arrivals in 2024 and fell to 1.3 million by last summer, before going net negative entirely. This isn't a gradual softening. This is a cliff. And right now, there are somewhere between 4 and 9 million American citizens already living outside the United States. The range is that wide because, again, the government hasn't bothered tracking this properly since Eisenhower. The State Department estimates 1.6 million in Mexico alone, more than 1.5 million in Europe, 325,000 in the UK, 250,000 in Canada, and that doesn't fully count dual citizens or the Americans whose daily lives straddle the border. The Wall Street Journal analysis of just 15 countries with 2025 data found at least 180,000 new American arrivals. And that's a floor, not a ceiling, because most countries haven't reported full numbers yet. In nearly all of the European Union's 27 member states, the number of Americans arriving to live and work is at a record and rising. Portugal alone is up more than 500% since COVID. In 2024 alone, up 36%. In the past 10 years, the number of American residents nearly doubled in Spain and the Netherlands, more than doubled in the Czech Republic. Last year, more Americans moved to Germany than Germans moved to America. Same for Ireland, which welcomed 10,000 Americans in 2025, about double the number from 2024. And if you want proof that this isn't a temporary experiment, that people aren't just working remote from a nice apartment for a year and then going home, here's your number, plus 48%. Jump in American requests to renounce citizenship in 2024. There is now a months-long backlog. In 2025, immigration firms say that number likely outpaced 2024 again. Approximately 31,825 Americans secured Irish passports in 2024, an estimated 40,000 in 2025. Americans are applying for British citizenship at the highest rate since records began in 2004, 6,600 applications in just the year to March 2025. These aren't tourists getting an extra passport for convenience. These are people cutting the cord. Who's actually leaving, and it's not WHO, you think. Here's the part of this story that gets the least attention, and it's arguably the most important part. The media narrative on American expats defaults to two characters: the wealthy retiree sipping wine on a Tuscan terrace, or the idealistic 20-something laptop nomad who can work from anywhere and figures why not do it from Bali. Both exist. Neither one explains what's actually happening. Jen Barnett is a 54-year-old native of Alabama. She moved to Yucatan, Mexico in 2024 and founded a relocation company called Expatsy. When she describes the clients she is now moving out of America, she makes a distinction worth paying attention to. Previously, the Americans leaving were super adventurous and well-credentialed. Now they're ordinary people, like me. Jen Barnett, Expatsy founder. In 2024, Expatsy organized 3 group scouting trips. In 2025 to 57. Their stated goal is to move 1 million Americans. That's not a niche business. That's a mass market product. And they are not alone. The boom in relocation companies tells you everything about who the new American emigrant is. Lux Nomads caters to the wealthy. GTFO Tours, and yes, that's the actual name, targets Trump critics. Blacksit Global serves Black Americans. She hit refresh targets what the industry is now calling the biggest boom market of all: women. Relocation agencies describe their new clients as Midwestern small business owners, architects, financial advisors, engineers, who save on healthcare costs by living 7 time zones east of their American clients. Middle-aged divorcees looking for a fresh start. Americans on disability or Social Security stretching their benefits. Elderly Americans checking into nursing homes mushrooming across the Mexican border for a fraction of the U.S. cost. More than 100,000 young students enrolled abroad for a more affordable university degree. The Barcelona High School is a good case study. 2 years ago, 300 students, mostly from New York and California. Now, 600 students and expanding, with 3 additional floors under construction. The director, Amanda Slifo, walks through where the new families are coming from. Now we have Alaska, Utah, Texas, Colorado, Kentucky. Amanda Slifo, Barcelona High School director. That list matters. When the people leaving are only from New York and California, you can tell a story about coastal elites seeking out their preferred liberal social environment in Europe. When the list includes Alaska and Kentucky, that story collapses. The phenomenon has gone geographic mainstream. The new American immigrant is also, strikingly, more likely than ever to bring children, laying down roots in foreign schools, feeding into foreign universities, raising a generation of Americans who grow up somewhere else. Chris Ford is 41, works for a Dallas real estate investment firm, and is now helping run a kids' baseball league in Berlin, whose roster has doubled in size for each of the past 3 years. His reason for leaving is direct. You don't face the prospect of your 5-year-old going into a kindergarten and doing an active shooter drill. The wages are higher in the U.S., but the quality of life is higher in Europe. Chris Ford, Berlin. Michael LeBlanc is 56, a former creative producer at Adobe and Paramount. He moved to Lisbon with his 2 children after the second active shooter scare at his 8-year-old son's Los Angeles school. Within 6 months, his wife had found work selling Lisbon real estate to incoming Americans. Some 58% of foreign buyers in Portugal are now from the United States. House prices in Lisbon's upmarket historical districts have doubled in 5 years. Kelly McCoy is 45, from Buffalo, New York. She was an insurance analyst making $80,000 a year and couldn't make ends meet. She moved to Albania in 2024 taking advantage of a special visa that offers U.S. citizens 1 year of tax-free living on foreign income, no questions asked. When she was treated for a concussion and a broken arm at a local hospital, she wandered the halls confused because nobody was trying to charge her. She now works as a consultant, helping other Americans with limited means make the same move. Her clients include people on Social Security and disability. In Albania, you can very easily right now survive on $1,000 a month. Kelly McCoy, former Buffalo insurance analyst. One Texan fintech specialist, watching his son play on a Madrid square, some locals have nicknamed Plaza USA, discovered that by simply buying European private health insurance and canceling his American plan, he saved enough to cover tuition at one of Madrid's elite schools. The entire arithmetic of his financial life changed by crossing an ocean. Of the 12 American students the Wall Street Journal spoke to, studying in Spain, Scotland, and England, only one planned to return to the United States. One, the gender gap. Nobody is talking about. Now here is the data point that I think deserves far more attention than it's getting, because it's not just surprising, it's historically unprecedented. Gallup has been tracking how many people around the world want to permanently leave their home country since 2007. Across every country, across every year, the data shows a pretty consistent pattern. Younger people want to leave more than older people. Single people more than married. Men and women roughly comparable. Then the United States in 2025 broke every pattern Gallup had ever recorded. 40%. American women aged 15 to 44 who say they would permanently move abroad if they could. That is 4 times higher than the 10% who said the same in 2014. 4 times. In 11 years. That is not a statistical wobble. That is a collapse in a demographics relationship with its own country. The gender gap this created is 21 percentage points. 40% of younger women versus just 19% of younger men under 45. Gallup has measured migration desire in countries around the world for nearly 2 decades. Before 2025, no country had ever recorded a gap of 20 points or more between younger men and younger women on this question. The United States didn't just break the record, it became the record. 63%. Of young Americans aged 18 to 34 who have considered relocating to another country because of the state of the nation, per the American Psychological Association's 2025 Stress in America survey. Compare that to 2008, the worst financial crisis in living memory at the time. Gallup asked Americans how many wanted to leave. The answer was 1 in 10. Today, 1 in 5, across the entire adult population. Among young women, 4 in 10. And critically, this desire to leave among younger women has risen regardless of marital status or whether they have children at home. In 2025, 41% of younger married women and 45% of single younger women said they'd leave if they could, the narrowest gap between married and single women Gallup has ever recorded on this question. Marriage is no longer a barrier to imagining a life somewhere else. The Gallup researchers note that younger women's confidence in national institutions has fallen by 17 points over the past decade, a steeper decline than any other demographic group. Confidence in the judicial system specifically dropped from 55% in 2015 to 32% in 2025. Meanwhile, older men's institutional confidence went up 15 points. The two groups are moving in completely opposite directions. The APA survey found that when Americans describe their country today, the 5 most common words chosen are freedom, corruption, opportunity, division, and hope. In that order, corruption ranked 2nd, division ranked 4th, fear ranked 6th. This is not the emotional profile of a population that feels settled. What Europe is offering that America stopped providing. Let's be honest about what the new American immigrant is actually buying, because it's more specific than cheaper rent or better weather. The social democracies of Europe have, largely quietly, engineered a competitive advantage over the United States, and they've been building it deliberately. Their governments have eased visa rules and constructed tax codes that let U.S. citizens experience European life on American-style effective tax rates. The EU has set aside 500 million euros specifically to lure top scientists to the continent. Individual countries are running their own programs. Albania offers a 1-year tax-free visa for U.S. citizens with foreign income. Almost 400 Americans signed up for a single conference call last month to learn how to move there. Almost 400 Americans. On a call about Albania, if you'd asked most Americans to find Albania on a map 5 years ago, they would have struggled. What Europe is offering, in return for American income, is a specific package. Inexpensive healthcare, walkable cities, affordable schools, safe, and, outside of universities, generally rated higher than America's. Housing that is cheaper and more plentiful in many cities. Co-working spaces where English has already displaced the local language. and a pension system so top-heavy that French retirees now out-earn working-age adults. That last detail deserves a moment. France's retirees, the people who are no longer working, now have higher incomes than the people who are. The Luxembourg income study confirmed this. The European social contract, whatever its other problems, is delivering on the specific promises that older Americans feel America has broken. The dollar weakened 12% against the euro in 2025. You'd expect that to slow the American influx into Europe. It made everything more expensive for them. Instead, the influx accelerated in all the large euro countries: France, Italy, Spain, Germany. It also continued growing in smaller nations like Slovenia and Portugal. The financial logic of going to Europe is strong enough to absorb a 12% currency hit and still keep growing. Then there's the education pipeline, which is building something longer lasting than any visa program. The number of Americans obtaining a degree in Europe has doubled since 2011. It rose 14% in the UK last year alone. International students coming to America, meanwhile, fell 17% last fall and is expected to drop further. The University of St. Andrews in Scotland, Prince William's alma mater, receives so many American students it is now informally known as Mini Nantucket. Madrid's IE University has as many American students as Spanish ones. The number of U.S.-based academics seeking jobs overseas rose by more than a fifth last year. Most landed in Europe, drawn in part by the EU's €500 million scientific recruitment fund. Some blamed American research funding cuts. Others blamed speech restrictions on campuses from both directions, the right cutting budgets, the left policing expression. And social media is industrializing the pipeline in ways that earlier waves of immigration never had access to. Casey Rose, a former professional dancer, built a best-selling memoir out of her vignettes from Italy. The R&B artist Kelis is regaling 3 million Instagram followers with videos on the opportunities she says await Black Americans ready to join her in Kenya. Blacksit Global now runs organized group moves. Dozens of relocation influencers are demystifying the process for audiences who previously thought leaving America permanently was something only eccentric millionaires did. The economic time bomb this creates for the United States. Here's where the story stops being about individual life choices and starts being about something that will affect every American who stays. The United States is running a $38.8 trillion national debt. Its birth rate has been below the replacement rate since 2008, and it is now simultaneously losing the immigrants who traditionally offset that demographic shortfall, and losing its own citizens at a record pace. Those three things together are not a political talking point. They are an actuarial crisis. Start with the immigration side. Nearly 80% of immigrants to the United States are of working age. They account for 19% of the American workforce, roughly 33 million people. They paid more than $650 billion in taxes in 2023 alone. The Cato Institute ran a detailed analysis of every tax receipt and government expenditure between 1993 and 2023. What they found: $14.5 trillion. Total fiscal surplus delivered by immigrant taxpayers, both documented and undocumented, over the 30-year period from 1993 to 2023, according to the Cato Institute. On a per capita basis, immigrants paid nearly $100,000 more in taxes than the average native-born American over that period. The Cato researchers calculated that in their absence, the national debt would be approximately 200% of GDP rather than the currently estimated 120%. Their exact words for immigrant children: the most potent fiscal engine this country has ever seen. Now add the departure of American citizens themselves on top of that. These are not the Americans the economy can most afford to lose. The people who can actually execute an international relocation, find a foreign visa, navigate foreign bureaucracy, maintain employment or retire in a different country, skew toward the educated, the employed, and the financially resourceful. The people leaving are disproportionately the taxpayers, the professionals, the people whose income taxes fund the social programs that everyone else depends on. The Deloitte Global Economics Research Center published an analysis of exactly this scenario. At a time when native population growth is slowing due to persistently low fertility rates, declining immigration is poised to weigh heavily on labor supply, debt sustainability, and long-term economic growth, with negative effects likely to emerge even in the near term. Deloitte Global Economics Research Center. The Congressional Budget Office had projected that a rise of 8.7 million immigrants over the 5-year period starting in 2024 would translate to a 2.9% surge in GDP. That projection was built on immigration continuing at its prior rate. It isn't. Meanwhile, the U.S. academic talent pipeline is in active reverse. The number of Americans seeking academic jobs overseas is up 21%. International students coming to American universities are down 17% in a single year. The people who would have spent years in American institutions. The people who would have spent years in American institutions, building careers, paying taxes, buying homes, starting businesses, are choosing different institutions in different countries. And here is the quiet cruelty of the feedback loop. As the tax base shrinks, the social programs that middle-class Americans depend on come under greater fiscal pressure, which makes the United States less attractive to the next wave of potential immigrants and more attractive to leave for the Americans who remain. The outflow accelerates its own cause. The White House response to this data, for what it's worth, is that the U.S. economy is outpacing other developed nations, that deportations fulfilled a political promise, and that the country is attracting, quote, countless ultra-high net worth foreigners, paying $1 million each for a gold card visa. This is technically true. It is also mathematically an attempt to replace millions of working-age taxpayers with a small number of wealthy investors. The fiscal arithmetic does not work. What this actually says about America. There's a question at the center of all of this that nobody in a position of power seems to want to engage with directly. Is the new American emigrant a credit to the strength of their homeland's economy? After all, it is American salaries, powered by Silicon Valley companies dominating the global economy, that give this new class of expats the financial runway to finance a life in Europe or Latin America or Southeast Asia. In a sense, the U.S. economy is so strong it's enabling its own people to leave it. Or do these immigrants personify something darker, a loss of faith in America's future and way of life that no GDP number can offset? The researchers who've studied this trend the longest are blunt about what they see. It undercuts this American exceptionalism. We have the best quality of life, we're the best country in the world, everyone wants to move here. Well, Americans move abroad and find they like life better abroad. They like the social democratic policies. Caitlin Joyce, Temple University researcher. The Norwegian paradox is a useful illustration. In his rallies, Trump has repeatedly mused about attracting Norwegian immigrants, a staple of his vision of the ideal immigrant. The number of Norwegians living in the United States has fallen over the past 10 years. In 2024, it crossed a symbolic threshold. There are now more natural-born Americans living in Norway than Norwegian-born residents in the United States. The aspiration runs in the other direction. It has for a while. Across dozens of interviews conducted for the Wall Street Journal piece, U.S. expats describe their motivations as a tangle: economic incentives, lifestyle preferences, and disenchantment with the trajectory of America. They cited violent crime, cost of living, turbulent politics. Trump's re-election was a factor for many, though others voted for him. What unites them is not partisan alignment but a specific calculation. The life I want is more achievable somewhere else. The 79% of Americans who told SSRS researchers that politicians don't understand the economic reality they're living in. The 54% who say they feel isolated from others. The 62% for whom social division is a significant source of stress. These are not fringe sentiments. These are majority experiences in a country that is, officially, doing fine by macroeconomic measures. One of the Temple University researchers studying this trend ended her interview with the Wall Street Journal reporter, a reporter based in Europe, with a question that stuck. She posed a question based in Europe. What was it like living over there? She too was thinking about moving. Wall Street Journal. A researcher who has spent years studying Americans leaving America is herself thinking about leaving America. If that doesn't crystallize the moment we're in, I'm not sure what does. The locals where Americans are landing are not entirely welcoming, it should be said. In Bali, Colombia, and Thailand, the strain of housing American remote workers paid in dollars has triggered protests against gentrification. Barcelona's walls now carry graffiti. Digital nomads go home. Lisbon politicians debate on primetime television how to ensure locals aren't priced out of their own city. Dublin's Grand Canal Dock District now has more American-born residents than it did Irish immigrants during the potato famine. The irony of Americans experiencing in reverse what generations of immigrants brought to America is not lost on anyone. But none of the protests have slowed the flow. The Barcelona relocation consultant Leah Mashaka has a line she likes to share. I've never had a client that has chosen to go back to the U.S. Leah Mashaka, Barcelona relocation consultant. The Spanish government spokesperson, whose hometown of Pamplona draws Americans who know it from Hemingway's bullfighting chronicles, has her own explanation for why they stay, delivered with exactly as much wit as the situation deserves. Many Americans come, and there are many love stories. After 4 glasses of wine, they stay. It's a charming line. It's also slightly misleading. The Americans filling out citizenship renunciation paperwork, enrolling their children in foreign schools, and signing 30-year mortgages on Lisbon apartments are not staying because of the wine. They're staying because the calculation they made, quietly, individually, without making a political statement, is that the life they wanted is available elsewhere in a way it stopped being available at home. The question nobody in Washington has an answer to. In its 250th year, the United States is facing a question it has never had to seriously ask itself. Is it still the destination? Or has it become, for a growing and structurally significant portion of its own people, the place you leave? The Trump administration's answer is that the outflow of American citizens is an acceptable side effect of protecting the country from illegal immigration, and that the economy's strength will, eventually, make America irresistible again. The Gold Card program will attract wealthy investors. The tariffs will rebuild domestic manufacturing. The data will, in time, turn. What the administration hasn't answered is what it does about a birth rate that has been below replacement since 2008, a national debt approaching $40 trillion, and a shrinking tax base that is departing both through deportation and through voluntary emigration simultaneously. Those three problems do not resolve themselves. They compound. And the deeper issue, the one that no policy instrument directly addresses, is the one that Temple University researchers put in plain language. Americans are moving abroad and finding they like life better abroad. They like the social democratic policies. They like not worrying about healthcare bills. They like walking to work. They like not preparing their kindergartners for active shooter drills. 1 in 5 Americans who say they want to leave the U.S. permanently. In 2008, during the worst financial crisis in living memory, it was 1 in 10. The desire to leave has doubled in less than 20 years. That doubling is not about politics. It predates Trump's second term. It survived Biden's presidency. It is a structural trend rooted in a specific, durable calculation. The cost of staying is rising and the cost of leaving is falling. Remote work made it possible to keep an American salary while living somewhere cheaper. Social media made it possible to watch other people do it and decide it looked better than what you had. The relocation industry built an infrastructure to execute it, and a decade of mounting costs, housing, healthcare, childcare, education, gave millions of Americans the financial motive. The 1935 comparison is instructive not just as a historical footnote, but as a warning about what the data can hide. In 1935, Americans went to the Soviet Union, not because the Soviet Union was good, it wasn't, but because it offered something the United States, in that moment, could not. A job, a roof, a future that felt possible. Today's Americans are not going to authoritarian states. They're going to functioning democracies with better-rated schools, universal healthcare, lower violent crime rates, and cities where a professional class salary buys a quality of life that the same salary no longer buys in most of America. That distinction matters enormously, because it means this isn't the desperation of 1935. It's the preference of 2025. And preferences, once formed and acted on, are much harder to reverse than crises. The new American dream, for some of its citizens, is to no longer live there. Wall Street Journal, February 2026. The people leaving right now are the early movers. The relocation infrastructure is being built for millions. The influencer pipeline is running at full speed. The citizenship renunciation backlog is months long and getting longer. And somewhere in the American heartland right now there is a family from Kentucky or Alaska or Buffalo, not coastal elites, not political refugees, just people doing the math on their lives, who are on a conference call about Albania. Now the real question, the one this trend is going to force, sooner or later, is what exactly has to change in America for that math to work out differently? And that's a much harder video to make, because nobody in a position to answer it seems willing to ask the question. There are 33 million immigrant workers underpinning the American workforce right now. What happens to the economy when both inflow and outflow are moving the wrong direction at the same time? That's next. Like this video if you found it valuable and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.